Hi, and welcome to the I Teach Myself podcast. My name is Matthew Miniman, and this is episode 29. What can D&D teach us about tabletops? So, D&D tabletops. D&D Dungeons & Dragons, also known as the Devil's Dice. Dungeons & Dragons is a board game at which you imagine yourself in a mystical realm, and you level up, typically run by a dungeon master. You have a party that typically includes 5 of either your closest friends or the least tolerable people that you know. Dungeons and Dragons can be fun, it can be exciting, it can also be very boring, and honestly, it can be just aggravating as fuck. So, in Dungeons and Dragons, basically, you are presented with scenarios, and your team has to try to find ways around solving those scenarios with their skills and with what they have available to them. And tabletops are kind of the same thing. So if you don't know what a tabletop is, you've probably heard it if you've been in IT for a while, or if you've been associated with any sort of compliance system, or you've had to fill out cyber insurance paperwork, you've probably seen or heard this phrase. But tabletops are essentially theoretical exercises of your disaster recovery and response plans in regards to cybersecurity. Now, there are other tabletops. There are tabletops that are associated with like actual physical events, disaster scenarios, but it in the end they are all just a test of your ability to respond to those events. So, a cybersecurity tabletop it typically includes, it includes a scenario or scenarios to test that just your cybersecurity response. It's not really scoped for anything outside of that. And as an organization, you should be running tabletops at least annually for all of your different kinds of scenarios. So you should be running a tabletop for a business continuity event where your city has become under siege and you need to pay your employees somehow. You should have a tabletop where the highway system has suddenly evaporated and you need to understand what to do. And the entire purpose of this is to test your ability to respond and find holes in your preparations. So in the realm of cybersecurity, what you're looking for is, where are the gaps in our response coverage? Where are we blind to our own events? You want to fail in your tabletops because you want to find new things to do to help make you better prepared. You want to eventually have yourself get hacked. And so that requires a few things, and this leads into how they're best run. So tabletops are best run by an experienced cybersecurity professional. Typically, what you want is somebody who can sort of walk you through different scenarios and understand how attackers are going to operate within an environment based in certain scenarios. And when you're doing a tabletop, typically what you want to do is you want to associate about 4 hours with the tabletop. And that sounds like a lot, but you want to have those 4 hours across 3 different scenarios. And you want your exercise to have specific targets. So you have an attacker whose motives you as the response team have no inkling about, because as an attacker attacks your environment, you're probably not going to know their motivations either. So you run through these scenarios with this motivation sort of in the background, but whoever's running it, your facilitator for the for the tabletop, your dungeon master knows the motivations. They know exactly where this attacker is trying to get to inside of your environment and what they're trying to do with that data. And so you don't have to run the same type of tabletops every year, but you should definitely be focused on having tabletops where the attackers are trying to do different things. And so they're best run when you have an attacker, a full attack plan, and a full attack scope. And it does also kind of help to have somebody who is familiar with your environment running your tabletop, so that way they can kind of best craft how this attacker is going to move throughout your network and potentially find the blind spots. Now, in that same vein, it is best to have a lot of cooperation, a lot of interaction with the people involved with your tabletop, because just like with D&D, if you don't have anybody participating, it's kind of useless. It's kind of dumb. It's not really fun. And that tabletops are the same way. You want to have everybody cooperating and participating in your tabletop, because that's how you're going to get the best data, the best findings. In fact, my favorite tabletops are where you have an individual, you have this huge discussion about a whole thing, and everybody feels like they've gotten a handle around this one very particular scenario or situation within the scenario. And then one dude who's been like quiet for the entire time goes, well, what about this? And everybody freaks out because it's like, oh fuck, we forgot that. And it's wonderful because it when you get heated discussions in a tabletop, it really means that, one, people are paying attention, two, they're highly involved, and three, that their environment that they have things to improve on, and that you can show those in the tabletop. And so what is the result of the tabletop really is the question. And your result is going to be a list of findings. These are a list of things where either it is unclear whether or not specific types of controls are effective, or whether there are policies in place, or that there needs to be things added. And so with certain organizations, like, you might find, oh, well, we don't have any network monitoring. We don't have any way to detect when new devices are on our network or when current devices start sharing new ports. We don't have any way to do this, and we should probably have that. And so that would be a finding. And you'd want to shore that up as soon as possible within your organization. Another thing you might find is, oh, well, our employees are not educated to challenge anybody as they walk in the door. And we're not confident that they are, which is great. Now, in this whole same vein, you don't want somebody going all murder hobo on you and just like, well, this doesn't work, and this doesn't work, and this doesn't work. You don't want somebody who's like that, but you definitely want somebody who's at least able to think about certain things and be like, well, what about this thing that we kind of forgot about? Because, like, for instance, one of the most common situations I run into when running a tabletop scenario is we'll be discussing an attacker getting in, and they have gotten access to the network, and they are mapping out the network, and they are trying to identify any devices that they can use to attack, and basically you find any devices that they can leverage as a persistence point. And, typically everybody's like, well, we have antivirus, we have firewall, and all of these systems are protected, and we do vulnerability management, and so we're all good. All of these systems are protected. And then somebody's like, well, what about our legacy systems, which we still have online, which are from an operating system that's like 20 years old? And that is what you want. You want somebody going like, well, what about these systems that nobody else is thinking about, so that you can identify those and attack those. I run into organizations where they have that. They have servers still on Windows Server 2003, and those are exposed to attacks like Bluekeep, where you could effectively create a persistence platform on that server, and as an attacker, I can use that and leverage it for just an unending series of attacks against the rest of the network. So, you need to be aware of where those machines are and if they're still connected and how they operate within your system. And having somebody who can think that way inside of your environment is going to be key for your tabletop, because then you can at least identify, hey, we have this problem that we need to solve. And that's really the crux of the tabletop. That is what you want. You want that tabletop to be a list of findings, or the result of it to be a list of findings that you can then action against and make sure that you have a solution for these potential problems. Because again, your attackers are going to try to find any and all of these holes in your environment before you can. And so if you find them, patch them, and make sure that they aren't a vulnerability or they don't add to your attack surface, then that's all the better. So what do you do after a tabletop? Well, after a tabletop, you should get that list. The person running your tabletop should have a findings report. And your findings report should essentially look like a vulnerability management report. It should look like a list of vulnerabilities, a list of findings that are rated in severity and listed in order of what should take precedence over all other things. And so your tabletop findings, a lot of fucking organizations, like if you hire a third party to do your tabletops, a lot of fuckers will decide where they're going to write a 50 fucking page report where the first 25 goddamn pages are their methodologies of the tabletop, and they'll go into very elaborate detail on how the scenarios were formulated and whatnot. And it's just like, fuck you, dude. That is not important to the client. Your findings report should just be a list of findings. Now, to give it context, I do put in there some descriptive detail about the scenario, but it is always just very basically this is the situation around the scenario. This is what occurred, and this is how it's run. And so your scenarios should also be, as I said before, you should have 3 scenarios, and they should be different types of operations. And so typically the way that I work it is I have 2 that I make myself. I just come up with 2 scenarios. Oftentimes I'll throw in an access broker attack in there where an attacker has gained access within your environment, but they don't do anything for 6 to 12 months because they are trying to sell that access, and that should give you time to respond. Mm-hmm. But then another scenario that I do is something like a rogue device on your network. Somebody has brought in a device that has malware on it and is now running rampant within your network. And then the third scenario, I will usually use a pre-baked CISA scenario. And I will use their scenarios because the CISA will absolutely force your organization to consider what happens when they get fully compromised. And it is a good idea. And the reason why I run that, and I run it with my scenarios first and then CISA scenario last, because at CISA scenario, basically when you get compromised, every time I've run one, people will have their head in their hands and they're just shaking. They're like, oh my fucking God, we are not prepared. And they are worried about their environment because they have gone through the entire process of, well, if we get owned, this is it. How do we report? How do we recover? And what happens if they get everything? And it forces them to consider all those considerations, and maybe forces them to pay just a little bit more attention to the money that they're spending in cybersecurity. Anyway, after you get the report, after you get that findings report for the tabletop, you should then come up with a plan of action, and you should probably have a project manager or other like-minded individual create a plan of action and milestones POAM, where you have a project that resolves each individual finding in the report, and then provides a step by step, just a step by step report on how you guys are doing against your tabletops. So then when you do it next year, you can show that you've then progressed as far as what your findings last year were. And when you are part of the reason why you do this is because insurance companies and compliance frameworks are really looking at your company, and they want to know if you are security minded. And it will harm your business negatively. It will harm your business extremely negatively if you do not have this type of program running on at least a yearly basis, because you'll be blind to those gaps. You'll be blind to those areas where your tabletop finds problems. And so without it, it just makes you more liable to get hacked. And according to your cyber insurance company, it shows that you don't take it seriously. You don't take any of the cyber threats. You don't take your attack platform. You don't take any of your risk management seriously. You don't take any of it seriously. And so that's going to raise your rates that you have to pay for your cyber insurance. And if your cyber insurance company has it in their clause, which they probably fucking do, if they determine that your tabletops could have prevented the attack that causes you to use them, they will not cover that event. Again, remember, so your cyber insurance companies are looking to avoid paying you any money at all, ever. So you have to do everything you can to make sure that you're covered. So, lastly, who should be involved with the tabletop? Who should you invite to your D&D session? Well, obviously you want people who are going to participate. You want anybody and everybody who will participate. A good tabletop can contain as many or as few people as you want. I would say your tabletop should have more than 4 people. It probably should have somewhere the most engaged tabletops that I've had have always been about 10 or 12 people. And those individuals all have some sort of tangential or experience with the business. You want somebody there who has visibility into all aspects of the business, including, what budgets look like, what the maximum allowable downtime is. You want all these kinds of people to be there. You also want like individual entry level tier 1 techs. You want your help desk folk there. You want your top level engineers. You want everybody involved in it that you can have in there. And you also probably want some leadership. You probably want a CISO or CIO, CEO, or business owner. You probably want those people in there as well, so that it shows that everybody's taking this seriously. It's not just a minion thing that people, the minions have to do this because we're too busy to care about our own cybersecurity. So you want leadership involvement. Now, where should you run your tabletops? And this is something that I actually find enjoyable. I fucking do not want to be in an office in a fucking conference room for 4 hours with a bunch of sweaty dudes talking about this fucking thing. I would rather be outside with a bunch of sweaty dudes doing something fun. I typically do our tabletops. I do my tabletops at a driving range. Something that is kind of mindless, that has a certain level of A driving range typically isn't that noisy. It's outside, so everybody can kind of enjoy being outdoors, and it's relaxing. You don't have to. You're not in an office. You're not in a conference room somewhere locked away, and that makes it a little bit more enjoyable. Plus, you get out of the office, so people aren't tempted to go and put hands on keyboards to either be distracted or to prove a point. You want people away from their keyboards so that they have to rely on and trust that they remember all of the things in their environment that they're looking at. Because when somebody brings up that one fucking point about the system that shouldn't exist anymore, you don't want somebody to be like, well, let me go and check and get distracted and not participate in the rest of the tabletop. You basically want that question to come up and somebody go, what about this? And everybody go, well, I guess, yeah, I don't have any way to prove that. So, well, I guess that's a thing now. Because again, this is not, this doesn't mean that the end all be all is, oh, you have a problem. The end all be all is that you are working towards making your cybersecurity better. And so you want to get away from your computers. So you don't necessarily have to do it at a driving range. You don't necessarily have to do it outside, outdoors. But I would definitely do it someplace where people don't have the capacity to access their computers or bring up the environment. Because again, this is a tabletop. There is no actual operation here. There is no reason for anybody to exercise, to perform any of the activities. It is purely theoretical. You want that theoretical mindset going on. Well, what about this? What about this? How do we respond in this scenario? And that will help. So you can have it at somebody's house if you really want to. Have somebody host it, just like a regular D&D party. The only thing that I suggest is that if you're going to have a D&D session or you're going to run a tabletop at a house, bring some fucking snacks. That's all I got, guys. Hope you have a great day.